In this video tutorial, I'm going to talk to you about a number of questions that students have asked and on how to write your report. Now, first, a few things about writing the report. Now, as you know, on Moodle, there is a document on how to write reports, but ultimately, you need to write a report using your word processor. And what is important to realize is, of course, that every report has a number of important components. Of course, title is the first one, and how to select a good title is described in that document. I show it right now. If I go to my Moodle webpage and if I go to the module, there is a document called let's see, it's called Undergraduate Assessment Guide. If you click that, you see a PDF document, and it has all sorts of details on how to write your research report. Guide to writing research reports. Okay. Now, this is very useful to use. Says, for example, how to write a title. It's how to write an abstract. Okay. So all these things can be found there. So as said, you have your title, you have your abstract. Now, the abstract should be something between 100 or 200 words, roughly. I mean, it can be a little bit less or a little bit more. Now, what's quite important is an introduction, and in the introduction, make sure you do your spell checking. In the introduction, you have a couple of important things. You have a short overview of the Simon effect. Okay. You are going to say in words, what is your question, research question. Now, we have discussed about research question. We more or less have all the same in this practical. What's your research question? And that is, of course, about whether the Simon effect turns around when you swap your hands. And I come back to that later. I will talk a little bit more about this interaction effect that we look for. You have your hypothesis. Now, that's it. In your methods, we have discussed this during the practicals as well, the needed details to replicate the study. You give information about things such as how many participants were there, what was their age, what was their gender, what were the stimuli, what did they look like. You have information about the procedure, so what was the task that participants had to do, how many trials were there. Also, what is quite good in the methods is if you have something like a graphical representation of the task that people did. Now, if you don't know what I mean with that, you can look at papers that have that. I mean, I have here, for example, an example paper about the Simon task. Now, it's different than it's about the Simon task. Of course, it's a different, slightly different question. But if you go to the methods, you see that there is some sort of like a graphical representation here of what the task looks like. Now, it would not be very good if you're just going to copy this and put it in your research report, apart from the fact that that would be sort of like plagiarism. But you need to be a little bit creative here and make a good, efficient representation. So it is not, it shouldn't have too many irrelevant details, but it should be clear and people should then understand what's going on. Okay. Further, also, I recommend you to read this paper. There's a link to it on Moodle. It also says a little bit about the theory behind the Simon effect. Okay. Now, in the results section, yeah, you report. What are you going to report? Now, in the results section, you're going to report. First of all, report descriptives. Yeah, the reaction times and error rates. Yeah, percentage of errors in the different conditions. You want to report the ANOVA on the RTs. You want to report the ANOVA ANOVA on the PEs, and okay, I said doesn't like that here. Automatic decapitalization. Okay, so that's what you have in the results. For that, you need, of course, to carry out your analysis with SPSS. Now, and then you have a discussion. Now, in the discussion, you always start with a short summary of the findings in words without using statistics. That's quite important. The how do you need to report how do you answer your question. Now, this depends a little bit on your findings, so that can be different for all of you, but I guess there are some students who find an interaction, some who didn't. So it depends what you found there. Also, um, some sort of like weaknesses in your studies. Always, what could be done, what could have been done better in your study. And there's always something. So that's good to have, and maybe an outlook for future studies. So, and again, there you need to use your creativity. Finally, you have your references. Now, you do not have to have many references. I'm not expecting that. If you have something like 5 references, I think that is reasonable. Maybe if you're very creative and you want to go a little bit deeper in your discussion or in your introduction, that's good as well. Okay, make sure that in the references you use APA format. It's maybe not a bad idea to use software to automatically create the reference list. Many people use this. There's software such as Zotero, EndNote, and what have you. Then that's up to you how to figure out how to do that. But of course, you can perfectly well do it by hand. There are many websites that explain the APA formatting guidelines, and it's also in this assessment handbook that I just have shown on Moodle. Also, a final issue. So I mentioned it would be nice to have at least one figure, in your figure about what the task looks like. And here I think you should have a figure, the figure as created with SPSS, but make sure they are very clear, and I will talk about that a little bit further in a moment. Some people asked me what the word count is. The word count is 2,500. That includes everything. Also, what's very important is that the word count is an absolute maximum. There is no reason for you to go all the way up to 2,500. I think in this case, you can write a very good report in maybe 1,700 words. Ultimately, it's about the quality of your report. It's not that the more words you have, the better grade you get. That's not how it works. What I certainly will look at when marking is style. You know, are you good in formulating clear sentences? Do you have many spelling mistakes? Those sort of things are, are part of what you look at. Because if you would submit a research report to a journal and it's full of mistakes, of course people are going to say, well, there's a problem with that. Sometimes, in extreme cases, it's very difficult to understand sentences if they're very poorly formulated. So if you have clear, good formulation of language, that's something that you're being rewarded for in your grading. Right, okay. Um, Also, just another point I wanted to make about the abstract. Um, you know, the details are given in the assessment guide, but typically should not contain statistical reporting. So, like reporting, so no p-values, no f-values, etc. It's you report things in words. All right. So okay, that's that. So now I would like to go for a moment to SPSS. Now here is the data that we have looked at before. I just wanted to talk a little bit more about the interaction effect in the ANOVA. So in order to show you this, I'm going to first carry out a repeated measures ANOVA on these data here under response time data. Going to click Analyze and then repeated measures. I have two levels. So I'm going to, the first one is, as I said before, congruency, and then I have posture, okay, with two levels. Now, because you have two levels in each of these factors, you actually do not have any contrasts. You just have main effects and you have an interaction. And I'm saying that because one student asked about contrasts, so you don't need to further worry about that. Now, I'm now going to say define, as I did last time. I'm not going into too much details here because I have shown this a couple of times in the other videos. So I'm just quickly doing this so that we so that we do that correctly. Right. Okay, so this is good. So I need to go to plots. As I said, I would like to have a plot here. Okay, continue, and I have some options. Maybe I want to descriptive statistics. That's quite good to have. And then okay. And I'm going to run this in SPSS. There's my output. Now you have seen this before in the other videos. Now, what I wanted to talk about a little is, first of all, once more. So I just maybe give you an example of how I would write up these results partially. So in this case, just reporting the uh, the analysis of variance, the ANOVA, and then just looking at this here. Okay, so how do we do this? I would say in the results, so you can have something like that, like the repeated measures ANOVA on response times showed a main effect of congruency. and then you can say something like f1 comma 15 equals 12.062, and that's of course based here on this here. Okay, now it calls these things also here contrasts. Okay, so don't, but ultimately this is a main effect, this is a main effect here, and this is an interaction. Okay, so note here that I carefully make this F an italic font, right? This is very important. And also then I need to give the p-value. P-value is equals 0.003. Now note that I make that p-value italic. It's very important. And then I would say, as a follow-up sentence, participants were faster in congruent trials, and then I would in brackets say mean equals I'm going to add that in a second, then in incongruent trials equals and then later I'm going to, so first of all I'm going to make this italic. Okay, and now I'm going to go how fast actually were people in the congruent trials. Now, as you remember, last time I showed you that it doesn't show you the average of congruent trials. You need to calculate that yourself by taking in the congruent in a normal posture and in the swap posture. So it is the average of 431 and 463, and that number would be entered here. And for incongruent, you would take the average of these two, 507 and 486, and you would enter that. Okay, and so that is basically all you need to report this. You could so now actually that is it. Then you would do the same for the other main effect, for swapped versus normal. Now let's see what we had in this case. We didn't have a significant effect here actually, 0.09. So you would just say that. You would say, okay, the main effect of posture was not statistically significant. And then again, you would report. You can report it equals 3.1. So, and then it's good to also add the p-value, and because there is no statistical difference, you probably do not need to actually report the individual values for the two postures as you did here, because it's not statistically significant, so maybe it's not that interesting. And then in regard to the interaction, you can close this further. There was no statistically significant interaction between the factor congruence and posture. F1,15 equals 0.721, P equals 0.409. All right. Okay. Now, if it would have been significant, I would have reported the Simon effect in both cases. So just imagine for a second, okay, that this would have been significant. Imagine, for example, Now forget about this. So imagine this would have been highly significant, right? So imagine this would, this effect would, for whatever reason, this effect would have been whatever 10.7. Imagine it was like that, and imagine it would have been, say, significant. I choose a value here. It doesn't really matter. Okay, so if that's significant, then I would have gone. Then I would have said, I would say, in the case of normal posture, the Simon effect was certainly, yeah, how many milliseconds it is. Now remember, the Simon effect is incongruent minus congruent trials, and whereas in the swapped hands or swapped hands posture, the Simon effect was, and then how many milliseconds, right? And then note here, Simon effect is, RT, the response time in incongruent trials minus RT in congruent trials. And you find that, of course, if you go here, up here, for example, for the normal posture, it would be 463 minus 431, and for for the normal posture, it would be 486 minus 431, and for the swapped posture, the Simon effect would be 507 minus 463. There you go. So that is fairly straightforward. Now let's have a look at this figure. It will be nice if you have a good figure. This figure is, I think, not perfect to directly copy and paste. So you can copy it, and I think you can then directly paste it in Word. But I think the problem is that I think this is not good enough to just copy and paste it. Okay. You need to make changes to this. So what you need to do is, for example, I think the lines, these two lines, that's nice. But for the posture, instead of saying 1 and 2, I would say something like normal and swapped arms. Okay. Here, estimated marginal means, that's not very meaningful. I would have something reaction time in milliseconds. And here I would say congruent, and here I would say incongruent instead of 1 and 2. Yeah, and you can still call this congruency. So that that there is a lot of detail, and you would have to have a caption. So you would have, say, figure 1, and then description of what people should conclude and see in this figure. And look at some of the papers that I have recommended to see what a good caption of a figure looks like. Is something you can do yourself, and also make sure that this title here, also this is not very meaningful, so you can completely take this out. Right. Okay. That is the figure. Right. So now I just wanted to go back, so I'm going to close this here. I'm going back to my SPSS window, and I just wanted to explain a little bit more about this interaction, what it actually means, in case you find this difficult. So if you look at this, now you know that 1 here this is congruent and this is incongruent. And you know that the blue line is the normal posture, and the red line is the swapped arms posture. Now, what you basically see here is that, first of all, you should see, okay, the fastest responses were in the congruent normal posture, okay? And people got a lot slower when they were in the incongruent normal posture, okay? So that is the Simon effect, the difference between this point here and this point here. That is a Simon effect. All right. Now, what's interesting is that for the red line, you have essentially the same line. You know, people are faster in congruent than in incongruent. So this line is pretty much parallel to the blue line. So the only difference here is that people just became slower. Now, interestingly, this effect was not statistically significant. So even though this line looks a lot higher, actually, in reality, there's a lot of variability here and it's not completely significant. Now, that might be because I didn't have enough participants. We don't know that for sure. But so it might be that you have actually the significant effect of posture. And if you have a significant effect of posture, the blue and red line, they're significantly different from one another. Now, in terms of interactions, you can have a whole bunch of different interactions here. The interaction that we were expecting, and I will draw that in a second for you. So let's go to a little bit to a drawing program. Just so sometimes it's easier to do with this with the drawing program. Imagine here that I have a figure, okay, so and I'm going to draw some lines. I'm first going to draw my normal posture line. Say this is my normal posture line, okay, and I have draw a line just for illustration. Okay, so there we go. And oops, what happened here to this line? I need to make this black. So all right. So now imagine this is my here on the x-axis we have so we have our figure here. So in the ideal figure we have here on the congruent. So we have congruent trials here. We have incongruent trials here. And I'll make this a little bit bigger just to make the example a little bit clearer to you. Okay, so here we have a normal Simon effect, okay, so this is a normal Simon effect, and this could be, for example, the effect that we have in the normal posture. All right. Okay, so this is, I can even like do it like this. You know, I can even put normal posture here. Well, let's not do that. Let's just do it like this. Now, if you go back to SPSS, actually the blue, that is the normal posture line. That is actually a line like that, right? So I just drew it here myself just to give you some illustration. Now, what we saw in my data was something like this. So actually more or less the same. So we have here swapped hands. All right, the swapped hands, and all we had is just that there was a difference. So we saw that this line here is just higher than the normal posture. So that means people just got slower when the hands were swapped, but there was no interaction. So what does an interaction look like? Well, the interaction that we actually wanted to really test for, and I'm going to color the two dots here to actually make this a little bit different. So I'm going to make them the magenta. So do that. So like okay. So what I actually had thought might happen if anatomy plays a role was something like this. So this, oops. So this would be a really nice. Sorry, I'm just playing around a little bit here with the coloring. No, I don't want that like that. Oh, why is that doing that? Sorry, just need to draw this line a little bit better. Okay, so an interaction, for example, can look like this. Okay, so where you see the if you have the swapped hands condition like this, you see that people become faster in incongruent than in congruent trials. And that was what we said. If the anatomical relation between sort of like your perception and your action plays a role, so the idea that the left side of your perceptual system is somehow directly connected with the left side of your body, then you might expect such an interactive effect. Now we didn't see something like that. Okay, so we didn't have such an interaction. So this would be actually a really nice interaction because you have this so-called crossover. Now interactions do not always look like that. You could also have a very different situation. You could have something like you could have this, but you could have had a situation where in both cases, um, in both cases, okay, so I need to make that line a little bit better as well, just for illustration. Okay, so you could have a situation where in both cases you have a real Simon effect. So for the normal posture, you might have a Simon effect, but it might be more extreme for the swapped hands. Now, so if you have that sort of interaction, this is an interaction, and that is because the Simon effect here is smaller than the Simon effect here, just because incongruent minus congruent, that's a much larger effect. Then you have an interaction, but it does not prove that there is a direct anatomical relation between the left side of your perceptual system and your arms. So say between the left side of your perceptual system and your left hand on the one hand, and the right perceptual part system and your right hand. In this case, there is an interesting interaction, but it doesn't prove that point. In order to prove the point that we were testing, you really have to have this crossover that I just showed a while ago. So you can have different interactions. You can also have even weirder interactions. That would be also interesting. Say, for example, you can have an interaction where for example, you have something like this. Now, this is unlikely to happen, but it would also be an interaction. Now, in this specific case, it means that there is simply no Simon effect in the normal posture. If that happens in your data, then that's very unusual, because typically you find the Simon effect with normal posture. So there's no reason to expect that, but it could even be that people were faster in incongruent than incongruent. And all I've done here is really to try to show you a little bit about the interactions that can occur in this type of study. And with that, I would like to almost end the video. There's one last thing that I wanted to show you, and that is actually about the figures that we have used. So here I'm logging into my SciToolkit account. If I go to my experiment and I want to see the pictures, I can click on View Files, okay, and then I see all the images that are available in the experiment. Now these are bitmap files, so you can use these. What you can also do is, in principle, you can open the file stimuli.svg. That is actually now I need to open this with Inkscape. That is these are sort of like the raw files that you can edit a little bit. There's no reason for you to do that. I just wanted to show you how this is made, so that you can actually edit and change the instructions. You don't really need to do that, but I just wanted to show you that. But what is nice, so you do not need to copy the instructions into your report. You can just say what the text was, but you could show these figures. Okay, that would be quite nice. These arrows. And how big are they? Well, they have different size on different monitors. You can just say, well, on a standard monitor, they are so and so many millimeters by so and so many millimeters in width and height. I mean, that would be useful. But, of course, people work with different monitors. Look at my example paper about the Simon effect that I just showed you to see how this reporting can be done. And that is it, basically.